MacNichol, and I'm a former principal in a number of high schools, so I've been given permission at the beginning and to use my principal's voice to call everybody to order and to please sit down in your seat. Okay, so welcome and thank you for being here for this Protecting Montana from Data Center Impact Forum. I'm a resident of Gallatin County, and I'm on the Upper Missouri Waterkeeper Board. And it's important tonight to recognize that this is a nonpartisan educational forum to help us understand the issue. And that has seemingly burst onto the scene, although it's been around for a while, but it just seems so much bigger and more impending. Our hope is this panel discussion is the beginning of informed citizen engagement. So thank you so much for coming tonight, because I think this is a great beginning. The restrooms are there. This is my housekeeping business. There is no intermission, and snacks are available on the back table. You're welcome to go get them whenever you want. There are sign-in sheets, as I think I saw a lot of you signing in. Please do so before you leave, because this is a way for us to follow up and to give you information and to share not only some of the resources, but this is also going to be videotaped and on YouTube, and the MEIC will be on their website. So it's really nice to share that with other people that couldn't make it here tonight. There will be also note cards that are going to be passed around for you to use to write your questions and also to submit them. Ben, please raise your hand. Ben is very important here.
Vanna White tonight. Grabbing some more note cards right now.
So as you're listening and as you're thinking and as you're reflecting, as you have questions, please write those down. And Ben will collect them, and we will try to, on the fly, kind of sort and match. And some of them, might be questions for legislators, because there are some here in the building if you're on the corner of that. But also to send to other parts of the government to have them answer your questions. And you just could hold your cards up when you're ready, and Ben will pick them up. I told you about the session being recorded, so that is really a bonus for all of us. So my summary of the purpose tonight is that we're here to learn more about data centers, the energy and water-hungry buildings that are being supported, are being built to support AI, crypto mining, and other internet services. This has been going on a long time, as you are aware probably. It's the scale that has changed, and that's really the concern. Gallatin Valley needs to move fast during this small window of opportunity to learn more, to engage with our elected officials, and to help guide the conversations and the regulations to protect our communities. We have gathered the panelists here tonight, to my left here, to give you information on a wide range of subjects relevant to data centers, including how to get involved in the discussion and influence development. Issues associated with it that they're going to touch on are water use, light pollution, water pollution, electricity use, and particularly rate increases, noise pollution, sightline disruptions. So all of those things are sort of swirling around in this thing that we're not quite sure about, because there seems to be a veil over what the state is doing and whether they're approving or in negotiations. It's very, very hard to get that information right now, which is what we want you to push on the system so that we can get information to make informed decisions. So again, please write your questions down as they come to you. I'd like to thank and introduce our panelists generally now this evening. First is Ann Hedges, who's the executive director of the Environmental Information Center. Alsentzer, the Executive Director of the Upper Missouri Waterkeeper, Karin Kirk, a science writer and researcher with Montanans for Affordable Energy, and Isabel Friedman, who's a senior advocate, I hope I'm right, for the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC. We're lucky to have these committed experts with us, that's for darn sure. So please give them a big hand for coming tonight. And so I'll start. We're going to start having Karin with a presentation, and then we'll move through the panelists, and then have some questions at the end.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I got to see my slides a little bit, so we can roll with the slides. Yeah, so what even are data centers? You can go ahead to the next slide. They are basically everywhere in terms of the way we interact with them. Every time, phone is such an amazing thing, right? You pull out your phone, you can look up anything, right? A recipe, a weather report, whatever. Yeah, it's showing on your phone, but it lives in a data center somewhere. And so the internet kind of ebbs and flows through these data centers. You use them all the time. Like, we can talk about how terrible they are, and we will. But like the basics of a data center is something we interact with every time you click on Facebook, every time you post on a internet forum. All stuff doesn't live right on your phone, it lives in data centers. AWS, interesting, that's a part of Amazon. And when you watch a web page load, not so much on a phone, but on a computer where you can see that little bar, you'll see AWS come and go as it's loading. So this is a part of Amazon that houses an awful lot of websites, large and small. And it's actually more profitable than Amazon.com. Amazing. So this stuff is like operating at these huge scales quite invisibly, which is good because that's how we interact with all of our digital technology. Go ahead. So that's all fine. But then there's this scale that Roland talked about. Like, why is it scaling? And it's so funny. So you just like Google any question anymore. Like, why are data centers growing so fast? What do you get? That stupid AI overlay. And I love this total irony here. You can't turn this stuff off, right? It's creeping into everything, right? And do you want AI for this? Do you want it for this? Do you want it to summarize the reviews? Do you want it to make stuff up? Do you want like a funny cartoon? Right? And it's just like everywhere. And so AI is different in terms of the way the scale of it versus other types of data centers, even crypto. And so that's why you see suddenly they're popping up. Montana's going to get 3. No, we're going to get 11. No, like they're just coming all, faster and faster and faster. And the underlying problem is that AI is gluttonous when it comes to energy use because it's doing a lot, particularly if it's doing something that's graphic rich. Or if it's really doing a lot of thinking, right? Someone's got to write this term paper, certainly not the students, right? So AI has to work pretty hard. Or it's training, it's ingesting books and like everything from the internet. It's really working quite hard. And that uses a lot of electricity. That's the problem. So this isn't like your normal, bank where it's an online bank, right? It's much more intensive than that. And it also, at the same time, like we laugh, it has these sort of funny social ramifications that we don't like either. So it's this very cutting topic right now. So onward. So when we look at electricity use, that's actually a lot of what I do in data journalism. Electricity use, went like this. And low electricity use as we're all getting modernized, right? But then, like for the past 20 years, it's been pretty steady because we're kind of there, right? We have like nice lives, and we're grateful for that. And then just in the last couple of years, suddenly it starts to ramp up again. And this is the government source for vast amounts of energy data, super useful. And they say, oh wow, check it out. Electricity use is really starting to grow. So 1% this year, 3% in 2027. The last 4 years was growing across all 4 years. That's quite rare. And it's just going. And they say, they'll name one, because increasing demand from large computing centers. So our national electricity use is growing, and That's the biggest reason why. Same page. They pivot quickly. It's gonna be fun because we can just drill, baby, drill. We've got a lot of natural gas. We can increase that supply. We are going to increase that supply. And so we have increasing production of natural gas, and we have increasing electricity use. According to an agency that just brokers data, that seems fine. According to maybe us, it's less fine, I would say. Can you read this chat? Why is my electric bill so high? So how does this shake out? Like, what happens to our electric bill? So we'll go to the next slide. And so this is data from that EIA, that government agency. And so I love to just thumb through and say, what's going on in energy? And I found this cool graph, this cool data. And so this, I'll just explain it a little bit. So this is 1997 to 2007. We're going to walk through time. The colors are different classes of electricity use. So blue is us, residential household use. Green is commercial, so that includes like Costco and whatnot, but also data centers, which are the bigger user. And then red is industrial, so that's like refineries and mines and things like that. And what this is showing is not the price, but the change in the price, because those three classes do have different prices. But so this seems fair. The price goes up for one class, it goes up for all, and the lines kind of go in sync. That seems fair. Different classes of users, they pay different prices, but the prices change similarly. Seems like a good deal. Okay, let's go forward by 10 years. What? Why are these lines no longer tracking? Like, look at it. Like, this one goes up and this one goes down. That just doesn't seem right. What do you think is going to happen on the next one? It goes crazy. No. Yeah, so now, okay, they all went up. So COVID kind of, you see like a little dip in there and then a spike after. That's COVID. But look at the rate of the household residential electricity prices just really going crazy. And the others, yeah, they went up after COVID and then up less or leveled off. It just fundamentally doesn't seem fair. This is national data, so we're not pinning this on any like one utility or one power plant or data center. It's like everybody all together there in the US. Okay, well, we'll zoom in a little bit in the next slide. Keep going. So just look at the last couple of years. So have you heard about this thing called the K-shaped economy? Where, I can't do it with 2 hands. So like that means like it's getting good for some and others are being thrown under the bus. This is the K-shaped economy my slide. So here's our prices going up and here's the other prices like, not really going up. Again, so that's just a close-up view of the same problem. Good for some, not so good for others. Okay, so we're going to go ahead to the next slide. And what about the demand? You could say, well, like maybe we're just using more. Maybe we just love our iPhones and our electric cars. Answer no, that's not why. So the blue line on the bottom is us, so demand is kind of flat. Look at the green line though. That's commercial and data centers. That line's gone way up. So it's not. So our prices are going up, but we're not driving the demand. It seems even more unfair now, if you ask me. So just a quick, this is just a summary. Like, it puts all the unfair stuff in one nice picture. Here's all the demand. Here's data centers just adding to their demand, using more and more electricity for a very modest price increase. And here's us. We haven't really changed at all, and a huge price increase. So that's what sort of sets into motion our basic tension here over this. Is this just fundamentally unfair? Okay, let's zip ahead. So we'll do one more. So no surprise, people don't like this. Amazing. And so this is the really recent thing. This is happening very quickly. People are hearing about this and obviously not liking it. And you see more and more opposition to data centers. And I'm shortly going to segue into like, that's what we're all doing here and what can we do about it. But this is good to see, and it's really cross-cutting. It's across all parts of the USA, and it's even bipartisan. Like, is anything bipartisan now? No, but this really is, and so that's exciting because that means it's really groundswell for lots of people. Next slide. This group is called Data Center Watch, and they keep tabs on what's going on with opposition to data centers. And that's too small for you to read, but the opposition is mounting. And not only that, they say the opposition is getting organized. Here we are doing exactly the same. Political resistance builds and local organizing becomes more coordinated. This is now a sustained and intensifying trend. This is exactly who we are and what we're doing. Opposition to data centers consolidated into a national political force in the second half of last year. Again, that's us, that's what we're doing here. One more slide. Because of that, we are seeing the proliferation of lovely press releases. Right? What does a company do when they know they're unpopular? Or a politician for that matter? They write press releases. Anthropic is going to take care of those electricity price increases. Don't you worry about it. Thanks, NBC News repeats Anthropic's press release as their headline. Hard-hitting journalism there. Don't believe the press releases. And we're going to give you what you need to know so that you don't believe the press releases. Northwestern Energy promises transparency. They say they won't negotiate in secret. Great, let's see the documents. You'll see the documents. They are totally redacted. Don't believe the press releases. Go, pay attention, tune in, look at public policy, look at Public Service Commission, look at what Northwestern Energy is doing, not what they say they're going to do. So that's my transition to now we'll get into the real nitty-gritty, but I think you're primed for why this is an issue, and welcome to a national bipartisan movement.
Hi, so my name is Ann Hedges. I'm with the Montana Environmental Information Center, and this is the 9th event that MEIC has been involved in the last few months. We've been trying to do some education around what data centers are, what the problems are. And thank you, Karin. Her national analysis made it in the Washington Post. I think it's really important. The one thing that was missing is that it's the NVIDIA chip. The NVIDIA chip has the ability to compute and make these large language models that we have never had the ability to do before. And so it is a race to get these NVIDIA chips into these data centers to do all the things that you can do. And there's a lot of medical reasons, I hear, for AI, but there's a lot of stuff, like Karin mentioned, that is questionable as far as humans' need for it and whether we should be using this monstrous amount of electricity. So the impacts of data centers nationwide has really taken off with the advent of that NVIDIA chip just a few years ago. It's not very old. Being able to compute this quickly with this power is something really new, and that has been a game changer in this space. But what's been really happening is you've been seeing all over the country where these utilities and these data centers have been making deals. And about a year ago, Harvard came out with a study that talked about extracting profits from the public to pay for data centers. And it was full of examples of where the public has been subsidizing some of the richest guys in the world and their data centers. And that was really a game changer in this space. And it's only been a year that this study from Harvard came out, March 2025. And it made people wake up and have examples in their hand that they could point to and say, wait a minute, what about me? So in the summer of 2025, the East Coast Watchdog, like a consumer council, calculated that 70% or $9.3 billion in increased electricity costs over the past year was caused by data center demand. That's a lot. Then you had ERCOT, which is the transmission area for Texas. They just found this month that data center demand spike could drive 79% ERCOT price hike in 2027, according to the Energy Information Administration. So we're talking really big numbers, and we've been seeing these numbers all over the country. And then just yesterday, I found this article about how a Nevada utility, MB Energy, is cutting off a whole community at Lake Tahoe and told them they have to find a new energy source by next year because of data center demand. So the data center demand is escalating faster than we have as a Human race, the ability to serve load. Next slide. So what's been happening with Northwestern Energy? Let's just all get on the same page about Northwestern Energy's rates. So who here thinks that their electricity bill has increased if you're a Northwestern customer? Oh yeah, oh yeah. So this slide, thanks to Nick in our office, he's our engineer on staff, and he's awesome, he put this together. And you can see that, you know, residential customer use has been flat in Montana, in Northwestern Service Territory, since about 2005. But what has not been flat is our rates. And our rates have increased 87% since July of '09. That's about the time Northwestern acquired the Colstrip plant and became a vertically integrated utility. So what's happened in the last couple of years? Since 2022, Northwestern Energy's residential electricity rates have increased by 39.4% since 2022. So if you think your energy bills have increased, that's because they have. And the PSC doesn't seem to have a problem with that. Every time Northwestern comes in and asks for a rate hike, the PSC says, go right ahead. I think we're going to give you a haircut over here, just a little tiny one. Oh, you don't want that? Okay, never mind. That is what we are facing, is the residential customers are seeing really large increases in their electricity rates. Next slide. But yet we're not using more energy. So on average, Northwestern provides 760 megawatts of power to existing Montana customers. That's on average. That's here, right now. But what has happened? Northwestern has announced all of these data centers. This one is changing to be a 30 megawatt data center. We don't know where it's going to make power. And then Northwestern, the PSC, about a year ago said, hey, Northwestern, you've got to come in and you have to get permission from us to serve these really large loads. We need to make sure that it's not going. The legislature, thank you all you legislators, passed a law saying that PSC is responsible for making sure if these large loads come in, that our utility is not going to cause our rates to increase unnecessarily. And about a year ago in February, the PSC sent Northwestern a letter and they said, hey, you can't serve data center load. We see all these press releases you've come out with, but you can't serve them until you come to us. And Northwestern said, nuh-uh. And then the PSC again in late summer said the same thing. Yes, you do. You need to come to us. And Northwestern said, And then a whole bunch of other parties, including us, thanks to Earth Justice and a lot of our friends and partners, went and said, yes, they do have to. The law requires it. Northwestern said, okay, fine, uncle. We'll come in by the end of the year, end of 2025, and we'll ask for a tariff, a way to make sure that we're not charging customers for data center load. Well, 25 came and went, and we heard nothing. And then some really great people got on Northwestern's investor calls, which anybody can get on. And they found out Northwestern's telling its investors, oh, we're going to be there this summer. And oh, by the way, there are 11 more data centers that we want to serve. They didn't say where. They might have been in South Dakota, or they might be in South Dakota, they might be in Montana. We don't know. They also didn't tell the Public Service Commission. So we know that this is all Northwestern needs right now to provide customers power, but that's where we're headed with data center proposals in Montana. That last line, we don't know. We don't know if they're in South Dakota, we don't know if they're in Montana, we don't know if they're 100 megawatts or whether they're 1,000 megawatts. But we know that Northwestern has said the merger with Black Hills, one of the top 3 reasons Northwestern wants to merge with Black Hills in South Dakota is to serve data centers. That's what it said in its press release. Northwestern sees dollar signs. It has acquired a huge share of Colstrip, and it doesn't have any customers for that new share. And it has said that it wants that new share of Colstrip to go to data centers. The problem is, I'm pretty sure data centers don't want to be responsible for paying for an old plant that breaks down frequently and is often not available at those times when we need it most, when it's really cold, not this year, climate change, when it's really cold or when it's really hot. So it's not a terribly reliable plant. It operates these days like a peaker, which is the dumbest way you can operate a coal plant. It's hard on the equipment. They're not meant to operate that way. But Northwestern needs to do something with all that extra power that it's picking up from the companies that are leaving Colstrip. And so it's looking at data centers as its solution. Next slide. So the problem here is, what if this is a bubble? And it is not a question that we are the only ones asking. The investors on Wall Street are asking the exact same question. So first off, you have all the chips in the world are made in Taiwan, and that has a China problem. I mean, not joking, the US government, if you read this New York Times story from last month, you will see that the chips in the world, the US government has been warning the tech sector that we have to diversify where we manufacture chips. And these chips are made in Taiwan. And China is going to control Taiwan soon. Then you have the worry of, is this a bubble? Is this a bubble? Well, the question is, what does that mean for us if it's a bubble? And what that means is a utility, which has happened, a utility goes out and says, hey, we've got this great idea. We're going to build a data center, and it needs a 500 megawatt gas plant, or it needs a coal plant, or it needs a big power plant of some other type. And then that data center doesn't find a buyer. Or the data center decides, you know what, we get better rates down in Texas. And so they go and they leave the state. But in the meantime, if we've already built their power plant and their transmission lines, who pays? We're gonna have what's known as a stranded asset. And somebody's gonna have to make the utility whole. So if this is a bubble, and this does collapse, or AI figures out AI and they don't need as much energy as a proposal or a project in China showed, the DeepSeek project about a year ago, we won't need this many data centers. But these guys are spending money like nobody's ever seen before to make these data centers and get AI off the ground in the States. Next slide. So we are not the only ones, as Karin said, who oppose this. Ron DeSantis, this is not someone I usually agree with, but the thing that I love is this. The Republican Party of Texas, just in the last couple weeks, has passed a resolution that reads like something I wrote. It is about no more data centers until they pay their own way. And that is all we are asking. I am not opposed to AI. I am not opposed to data centers. I'm kind of sometimes opposed to AI. But I'm not opposed to them if they pay their own way. They take care of their water resources. They don't harm our communities. That's what we're asking for, and that's what the Republican Party of Texas asked for. Next slide. So data centers just have a myriad of challenges, so many challenges. And you can see this line, this laundry list on the side. They're not good at paying their property taxes. They come with all sorts of problems for communities, air quality, etc. We'll go into those a little bit later. Next slide. Question we have, I'm going to go a little long, I'm sorry. Question we have is who's in charge. And here's the problem. It is not one entity that's in charge. Our Public Service Commission absolutely has an important role to play, and we are waiting for them to play that role, and we need people to be pushing them to do their job. We have a governor who comes from the data center world and the tech world. He loves data centers. He's not going to be any help. Then we have our counties. Our counties are the ones who can protect local people. They can pass zoning ordinances, they can pass noise ordinances, lighting ordinances, they can make sure these guys pay for their wastewater treatment systems and their, all of the infrastructure that they need at the local level. Your local government should be making sure that they cover those costs and it's not borne by us. Northwestern has a role and the legislature has a role. And we need policies in place to protect us. That's one of the reasons we're going around the state talking to people is we have a lot of ideas of what needs to be done, but until we have a critical mass of people demanding it from both sides of the political spectrum, we are not going to get the legislature to budge. And we really need the legislature to protect us. Next slide. So what has the legislature done about data centers? Not much. 2017, data centers came in and got, this was a crypto operation, they got a 0.9% property tax rate. That was lower than your property tax rate as a residential homeowner until just last year. So these guys are good. And then last session they came in and they said, oh, and everything related to a data center gets a 0.9% property tax rate. And they don't have to use renewable energy. They don't have to do anything to get that gift of a really super low property tax rate. That needs to change. Next slide. So this is where the PSC is right now. The Northwestern said, okay, fine, we will give you our agreements with these data centers, but they have to be privileged. And thanks to the brilliant lawyers that are justice, we pushed back on that. But this is what we have. This is what we know. I've seen a lot of redacted documents from the Public Service Commission. None of them look like this. Usually it's like a word or two here or there, a couple numbers. This is everything. We don't get to see anything. We are absolutely taking this one to the mat. We will not let this stand without a fight. Because if we don't know what's in these contracts, what we're finding out is that utilities are making sweetheart deals with data centers for power purchases. And I want to make sure that they are not paying a sweet deal while the rest of us pick up the tab. We deserve to know what they're paying for power. Next slide. So we're asking the Public Service Commission to regulate data centers, and we are asking the Public Service Commission to make them tell us what deals they have struck with these data centers. I think that's perfectly fair. Next slide. Okay, one last slide. I hear a lot of people say nuclear. How about nuclear? And let me tell you, we have never deregulated the nuclear sector as fast as we've been regulating it in the last few months. It is alarming. Who here wants nuclear waste stored in your community? Anyone? Anyone excited about nuclear waste being stored in Bozeman? Okay, I had one hand. That's the outcome. These small modular reactors are going to have waste, and it is going to have to be stored on site forever. And then they're changing the regulations from the ALARA principle is being removed from the Department of Energy regulations and from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. That is, it says your facilities, the radiation exposure has to be as low as reasonably achievable, and that was eliminated. That's just one of the many things they've been eliminating, and nobody is paying attention to what this administration is doing to fast-track nuclear development in this country, and we should all be concerned. I'm happy to talk more about that. It's really, it is intriguing, it sounds good, like maybe nuclear will get us off the hook. Let me tell you what, not under this administration, because all we've seen from Congress and our president and his agencies are deregulation of the nuclear sector. And aside from that, it's really expensive. So this is community solar, this is utility solar, this is solar and storage, this is geothermal, this is wind, this is gas peaking. This is what utilities are using for data centers. They're using gas peaking plants, not combined cycle, so they're more polluting too, and nuclear. So they want to build the most expensive forms of energy to feed these data centers, and in a lot of places in this country, they have made the customers, the residential customers, subsidize those costs. That's not going to work for us. We can make protections for the people of this state, and we need to do that next session. So next slide, and Guy, you're up on water. Oh, we have, sorry. We have some sheets on the back, and basically what we're saying is we want answers. Here are all the questions we should be asking our Public Service Commission, our legislators, our elected officials, our local government officials. These are really common sense questions, and we should be having the answers to these before data centers come our way. So I hope that you take one of these. I hope you start asking your elected officials and any data center that might want to locate it here. We just learned of one data center that went for a presidential exemption in Jefferson County for a 500 megawatt gas plant. 500 megawatt gas plant, and they wanted a presidential exemption from the Clean Air Act for a couple of years. It wasn't issued, thank God. But that's who these people are. They're going to get away with what they can get away with. And as long as we are an informed citizenry that is asking the right questions and demanding answers, I don't think that they're going to be able to do that here. So we need legislators to help make sure that that is the case. That is my last slide.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening.
You're awake. Good. So, I have the unenviable task of talking about the most controversial piece, which is what happens when your water runs dry. And that was the fundamental question, of course, that Ben Franklin is famous for, among other things, which is we know the worth of water when the well runs dry. And let us remember the context of data centers, which these are a new industrial user class that are very thirsty. They're thirsty at the same level as you running across the Bridger Mountain Range and on down on a hot day full of smoke. They are thirsty beyond belief and beyond scale that we've seen traditionally, with a user class which, among other things you've heard demand, are not properly regulated. So, what is your roadmap today? I have less busy slides, and I'm hopeful to speak and get really to these three basic buckets. I want to talk about this fancy term that is consumptive use, which is they're going to drink our water. I want to speak to the issue of pollution, and I want to speak to it within the microcosm of what happens when our water is contaminated, and what do we do about it? Do we have tools in our tool belt to prevent it in the first place? That's a big question. And then in that same vein, let's talk about our existing rules and whether or not they're capable of rising to the occasion and serving as a bulwark against. So, with that said, let's go to the next slide. Okay, I'm not going to exactly read this. You should understand that it's not just about sucking the proverbial water out in the straw. It also comes in an indirect and a cumulative way, which is to say, you have the actual physical big Costco-looking facility. It needs an insane volume of water to function because these are heat-emitting machines that need to cool down. We also have indirect water footprint, right? This is talking about the electricity, and this is a good reminder that these things all have externalities, which is to say, it's not just the footprint of a 30,000 square foot facility or a 100,000 square foot facility. It's about the indirect costs of how do you make sure that thing turns on and generate those dumb images you see on the phone. And third, it's also going to be about the supply chain, right? We're talking fundamentally about technology that's at an advancing scale, and it does not come magically off the tree. It is about the production and use of these materials, including the chips and what have you, that are in fact very water intensive in their use and demands. Okay, now we've established that they're going to use water. Let's talk about some of those brass tacks. Next slide, please. All right, these are the two basic ways that you talk about water at that general 30,000 foot level. How does a data center have impacts on water in terms of consumptive use, right? They're using it in some way. Well, here's the first way. You got to look at it as a trade-off. Are you going to use it for evaporative cooling, or are you going to use it for the air cooling? And the basic gist is this. You can't do it easily without having a big trade-off, right? If you think about it, and I'm a kid that grew up in the 90s we had the curio cabinet with the computer that got put in, and it sounded like a real machine. You turn it on, it does and then your dad would always say, don't shut the door, it's going to burn the house down, right? That's a great analogy to think about with these data centers, which is they have literally thousands upon thousands of computers generating heat, and the basic thrust is this. Those systems are very, very sensitive. They have to be kept at very precise regimens. They also have an expiration date, by the way, just like your phones and the planned obsolescence of our technology. These are also machines that have to be kept in equilibrium. And why is that important to remember? It's important to remember because they have to be cooled to a very precise level. And you can't do that at the current scale that we're talking about with the classic, well, we got antifreeze in your truck. Doesn't that suffice? No, it doesn't. They need to use water resources. Okay, so there's that slide. Let's go to the next one. All right, let's talk about the consumptive use, and let's talk about the scale. And that's a word you've heard a lot tonight. Scale, 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 scale. What does that actually mean? Well, here's the deal. These facilities have existed since, like me, the 90s, when I was a latchkey kid growing up in the neighborhood and nobody gave a damn about us, right? It was just like benign neglect. Well, we can no longer afford benign neglect when it comes to this new industrial user class. Because what we're talking about are hyperscale facilities. What's being proposed outside of Billings with Quantica is not your mom and pop 10-acre facility. What we're talking about is something that would dwarf, as an energy use, the entire existing baseload, but it would also require an enormous new source of water. Now you might ask yourself, why is that such a big deal? It's snowing outside. We got plenty of water. And here's the deal, we don't. Let's remember that where we exist today, and let's talk locally, because local politics is the real politics. We live in the upper Missouri River Basin. We do not have, at any given time, enough to go around. Water is our goal, right? So when we talk about, hypothetically, the proposals that have been off-traded saying we could put something in Three Forks. You got all the different tributaries of the Missouri coming there. You got Canyon Ferry upstream. It's not going to be that bad. And I would offer this, that what we know from the national examples is that the site-specific demand of water for these industrial-scale, hyperscale facilities would be not only put it into a class akin to our existing refineries on the Yellowstone, but it would also be demanding that with no certainty that we actually have an existing regulatory system that would make them pay it forward, which is to say, we don't have affirmative mechanisms to make sure they're even going to seek those permissions and permits, what have you, and play by those rules. And that's because of the scale and intensity of the build-out of this sector that has been occurring nationally in the last 3 years. And again, what's being proposed here, we got a break in that people discovered what was happening with Quantica, right? MEIC, among others, started sounding the alarm, and we realized, holy smokes, what they're proposing, we don't even know not just where they're going to get the energy from, but we don't know if our rules are capable of forcing them to have to apply for the permits, to slow this entire sector down, and make them fundamentally get to a pay-it-forward proposition. And that's really concerning, whereas here, in the Gallatin Valley, we live in a finite hydrologic cycle, right? Our groundwater may well seem that there's a lot physically available, but every single drop of that has legal entitlement attached to it. We have people that depend on it downstream, and whether you like that system or not, the reality is there's not enough to go around for a new big bully in a club. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so how can you get your water, right? Now, I don't want to preach about water rights because you truly will go to sleep. What you should know is that there are a couple different basic buckets and ways that you can get water in Montana, and it's applicable to data centers as well. The most important piece being, and this is a big threat, if a facility co-locates nearby a city, they could potentially try to purchase water, which would seem asinine given the city of Bozeman has both told us we're in a massive drought and we have to hike your rates, but at the same time there's plenty for new development. So let's just chew on that. You can have, of course, acquired private rights, but I will tell you from personal experience and of course from the conservation field, not a lot of people want to sell their water rights right now. You can try to do recycle, although it's not been done at this scale. And then you could, of course, try a hybrid solution, right? Well, let me also say this. Hyperscale facilities, none of these have really worked out. Where they've usually gone in is they've done the Catholic blessing, right? I'm going to ask for forgiveness, not permission. Too soon? Okay, next slide. Okay, so here's our regulatory framework. You might say, oh my gosh, you're an environmental attorney. There's lots of rules in the books. We're going to be fine. Well, let me tell you, none of these systems work unless they're vehemently and vigorously enforced. And right now, as a user class, we do not have a user class for data centers. So our existing rules underneath of our water rights laws or our qualitative laws are not up to snuff if they're not going to be vigorously enforced. And as Anne's slide showed you earlier tonight, who's in charge of enforcing it? Well, it's our executive. Our executive is a tech bro. He came from the culture literally building data centers and using them to facilitate technological advances. The problem is, if we don't enforce the rules, they don't work. So very quickly, Clean Water Act, Montana Water Quality Act, that's supposed to protect you from harm in the first place in terms of water pollution. The problem is, right now, theoretically, they would fit into the rubric of stormwater pollution, of a wastewater discharge permit, of saying what's in the wastewater. When you're cycling this through to clean up and take the heat out, where are you going to dispose of that thermal pollution when, by the way, 35% of the assessed rivers in Montana are already polluted by thermal loads and nutrients, among other things. 22% of our reservoirs and lakes are already contaminated, but we're going to be able to put out millions of gallons a day. We don't also know, in addition to that heat, what's in the derivatives that are cooling down these facilities. They don't disclose it. It's going to be a redacted Epstein file list, right? It's going to be nonsensical. So how does that protect us? I would offer it doesn't. Safe Drinking Water Act, they could try to inject it underground, but as we already know, our groundwater is connected to our rivers. Do we really want to be injecting underground at an industrial scale what we don't even know exists? I would offer no. So a big part of it is, how do we make that work for us? Clean Air Act. Let's not forget that a big part of this also is that there is enormous air pollution that comes with this, particularly if they don't have an energy source and they have their own boilers. Theoretically, our look before you leap law should work, but it has unfortunately been neutered in many different ways, and it does not work affirmatively, again, unless there's political will to force it to work. That is a big problem for us. County zoning is an opportunity, but that requires political will at the local level. Next slide, please. Okay, so we got big issues with our air limits, and I don't have enough time to get into it, but I would offer that one of the biggest single issues is not just your water, it's going to be the cumulative impacts of this in terms of your noise and your air pollution. So let's go to the next slide. I've already talked too much. Nope, next slide. Oh, these are your slides. That's who I don't recognize them. Well, that's my faux pas. Let me leave you with this. The single biggest thing that we need to recognize tonight is that we need to be calling for some meaningful protections for our water resources. There is a list back there from Waterkeeper and MEIC on what we should be doing, but some of the biggest single things we can do is make sure that we have a pay-it-forward proposition. And when that comes to water resources, perhaps the most simple and common sense thing is that we need to have a moratorium on these new industrial sectors coming in until we have a framework that is responsive to protect our water and resources up front. It's a pay-it-forward proposition. Let's make sure our rules specifically require they be brought into the system and prohibited absent affirmative demonstrations, and they carry their burdens of proof. That's both egalitarian, it's the right way to protect our communities, it's the right way to protect our outdoors heritage. Thank you.
I just want to thank guys for doing all of my slides so we can go home and get a nice early bedtime tonight. I have a sweetheart deal where I'm going to say a little bit more about all of the bad things that we're contending with, and then I get the fun job of giving you guys good news. So just bear with me a few more minutes and we'll get to the treat. So air quality, thank you for talking about the Clean Air Act. I'm going to do a little bit of technical explanation, and we'll just go through this really painlessly, as painless as air pollution can be. So there are categories of attainment and not attainment that refer to how clean an air is in a certain area. And saying that you are a non-attainment means that you are outside of the federal limits for pollution. So the bad news is, clearly there are a lot of areas of non-attainment. And the worst news is that there are 3 counties in Montana that are considered not in attainment, which means that they are above the limits for pollution. And the potential worst news is that in two out of these 3 counties, we have proposals for data center infrastructure there. And as Guy alluded to, data centers have a lot of air quality issues that are both already impacting communities across the country, and I have the feeling that we are only going to see the public health around these facilities deteriorate even further. So there are 3 main ways that air quality is impacted by this data center development, and they all have slightly different profiles of how they impact communities, but the first one is this question of on-site backup diesel generators, because data centers have convinced all of us that they need to run 24/7. So because of that, they are using hundreds of diesel generators on site, and not only are they using enough diesel generators to match their peak energy power, they are actually having twice or 3 times as much that amount of energy just to ensure that they can always be running. And why they need to run all the time, when our hospitals don't, I don't totally understand, but I'm not a scientist. So the next important way that we see air pollution come out of these data centers is this on-site primary power. And right now, we are seeing the explosion of data centers using gas turbines for primary power. And these are essentially being used because it's taking up to 5 to 7 years to get data centers on the grid. And that means they are circumventing the typical process of interconnection, and they're going straight to using things from gas turbines to ship engines that are being flown in just to power these data centers. The third big category is this off-site fossil fuel combustion. Easy example, coal strip, Yellowstone generating station. Good news, they're both in non-attainment areas, so on top of the already existing air pollution issues that we have to worry about, we now have new air pollution issues to worry about. And I know the font is really small, and I hope none of you are trying to read it, but I just want to highlight one thing, that there's a recent UC Riverside study that found that there will be roughly 600,000 new asthma cases in the US and $20 billion of public health costs by 2028 because of data centers. And that's 2 years from now. The study came out in the last year. Next slide, please. A few more pieces of bad news, and then we're done. I think, I hope so. So a few more, not so great impacts from data centers. The first being noise and light pollution. I think here in Montana we have a really good example of having already learned this really hard lesson. Bonner specifically in Missoula County learned this in the last few years, where there's a crypto mine that was put there, and all of Bonner and Missoula County came together and essentially forced the county and pushed them to establish these stronger zoning regulations, and this is establishing very baseline level of noise and light pollution control measures. So we've already had the privilege of learning from this, and hopefully with the legislators in the room, we continue to take this lesson forward. And then the next and second to last category is this e-waste, which I appreciate was already brought up, but we all have phones, presumably. I would love it if someone said no right now, but we all have phones. Many of us have iPhones. I have to get a new phone. It feels like every few years because suddenly it starts breaking. So my phone's the size of my hand. Data centers are the size of many football fields. And imagine all of the technology in there needing to be replaced every 2 to 5 years. All of that technology can't just be thrown out in theory. It needs to go somewhere special. Unfortunately, we don't have that infrastructure. So much of that technology ends up going to landfills and it's discarded. And the problem with that is communities that live near those landfills, workers that work within the landfills, are then exposed to toxins like arsenic, chromium, all of these things that don't sound good to me and I don't really want to spend time around, and that also lead to these really serious health issues. And one more health issue that I have, that I'd like to just raise, unfortunately, is PFAS, which seems to be everywhere in the news and everywhere in our planet, and is called forever chemicals because they are forever with us, whether we like it or not. Because of how relatively new the scale of data centers are, there are so many impacts that we just aren't fully aware of yet. And one of the big ones is understanding how PFAS will play a role in this. Thank you to Microsoft press releases, because they have told us that them, alongside other companies, are intending to use PFAS refrigerants for cooling. So you guys explained the water-air trade-off. There's a third devil in the room, which is just using toxic chemicals to cool, because why not just do that? And with PFAS, I think there's this challenge of, this is a broad class of chemicals. There are so many different ways to regulate them. But every state and locality and our federal government is just so far behind because the science is continuously evolving and we have yet to fully and adequately regulate them. So I'm gonna now stop giving you guys bad news, and I hope that you forgive me. And I have some good news. So more than $98 billion of these projects have been blocked or delayed, and that is 100% because of people like you all who are here today, who are caring about your community enough to take time out of your day to drive through snow and sleet and rain and whatever this is to come here. And I mean, from here, this room looks kind of like a lot of those photos. And I think there's something beautiful that I personally haven't experienced. I mean, I'm 25, I was born in 2000. The first president I remember was Trump in 2026. And you can imagine how just the entirety of like divisive politics have really colored how my generation perceives politics and discussion and discourse. And I don't think that there have been that many issues where we've really been able to come together. And this is such a cool thing and such a fun thing to work on just because we're seeing communities come together. And this is across red states, blue states, urban areas, rural areas. People are really banding together, and in some ways I think this feels like the opportunity that we haven't had in a decade. And I think one reason why this feels so emotionally evocative for a lot of us, and why I know many people here have gone to many data center talks, and I so appreciate you all. A lot of this is bigger than the energy and water and environmental implications that we've all spoken about. Big tech and the tech industry and data centers make us question our relationship with technology. It makes us question how billionaires have a role in our political systems. They make us question how the way that I grew up is very different from how many of you grew up, and how my children's children's children will probably live in a radically different world. And for us, we have this moment of like one opportunity to control our scenario. We have a constant circumventing of laws by these tech companies who have continuously paid very expensive legal fees to get around the laws that we have in place. And we have systems that are making it a little bit hard to keep up with regulation. So this feels like this crystallized opportunity for us to come together and have some control over our future. If you'll go to the next slide. So I have 3 big buckets of things that we can do. And these are hopefully the good piece of all of this, and also there are a lot of words on them. We have a lot of smart people in the room. You don't need to try and read this. You can just listen or not. So these are all predicated on 3 like pretty common sense principles to me. If they're not common sense to you, you can raise that afterwards. But one thing is just slowing down projects until we have all of the information. We know that the scale that data centers are being developed is absolutely unprecedented across any industry. And tech companies are building them so quickly that the federal government, states, cities do not have the appropriate guardrails in place, nor do they even have like a complete understanding of what the impacts are going to be. And I think that's where we have legislators in this room today trying to do their homework, but to some degree it takes time, and it takes all of us kind of stumbling on the way. So one tool that we are seeing communities use is this idea of a moratorium. And I think that word is terrifying and has a lot of emotional baggage, but the way that I've started to think about it for myself is we should have data center development only once we have guardrails to protect us. And we should put the health and public well-being of our communities ahead of fast-tracking these projects when we don't even have all of the information. So 54 cities and counties have already passed moratoriums across the country. 12 states, red and blue, have introduced data center moratorium bills. And these are both, I'm working in almost a dozen states on data center legislation, and the way that this is being passed in a bipartisan way is because it's just, we want to be thoughtful about the way that we let these new hyperscaler giants into our state, because we really care about the place that we live. So you can go to the next slide. Now, I think that this is an obvious one. Once again, I'm open to dissent, but I think all of us should be included in the process of data center development and approval. And right now, I appreciate both Karin and Ann bringing this up, but we don't have any information on these projects before they are greenlit. And many data center projects are being fast-tracked and done through NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. And this is a contract often between a government official and a developer. And this excludes all of us in the room from understanding the impacts to our communities when we are really the ones who are paying the burden. And I would just say, on the press release front, I would much rather have a whole holistic report with transparency rather than a press release that's doctored by the company that has an interest in not being transparent. So 3 easy ways to do this. 1, let's get rid of the use of non-disclosure agreements for projects that impact all of us. I don't think I need to explain that. This is being done across so many states and cities. Number 2, pre-construction transparency requirements. We need to understand what a facility will look like before it is greenlit. And this means that prior to and during the application process, companies are required to disclose very basic information. And I'm not saying trade secrets, I'm not saying anything that would impact competition. I'm just saying projected energy use, projected water use, where the facility is going to be and who is going to be using it. These are very basic things that I would have thought that we'd all have access to, but as it turns out, in doing this work now for the last year, we don't, and it's almost impossible to find. And the third thing is, after the pre-construction report, once data centers are already built, we want to continuously know what's going on. And this is helpful to lawyers in the room, but it's most importantly helpful to communities who are feeling the impacts and need to understand why and how. And once again, very simple information, nothing rocket science, just the reporting of things that impact all of us in this room. You can go to the next slide. So this is my last slide, and unfortunately it is the most complicated, but because we have legislators here, I think it's important that we go through it. So all of that is kind of the bare minimum of let's take our time, let's know what we're going to be dealing with. This is the let's be pragmatic about what we are actually okay with, and let's raise the floor for data centers when they come into the state. So, a few ideas. I'm just going to lay them out there, and I'm not endorsing these, I just am explaining what other states and cities are doing just to get our gears turning in this room. First one is just requiring higher standards, and this is across air quality, water quality, energy and water use, noise and light pollution. A few examples of these are this Beyonce policy. I hope we all love and are very excited to go past. Beyonce stands for Bring Your Own No Carbon Energy. And in theory, this would mean that data centers only use clean energy for primary and backup power. And this would not only prevent data centers from draining all of the energy that we as residents all need, but it would also hopefully eliminate a lot of the air pollution issues that I raised at the beginning. And especially assuming that that would prevent the build out of diesel generators and gas turbines. If you all want to take a straight shot at it, of banning diesel generators altogether or requiring full clean energy for both on-site, off-site, and primary and backup power, another option. Number 2 would be requiring recycled water efficient cooling. There was a bill in South Carolina and Kansas recently with bipartisan support that mandated closed-loop cooling systems. Those are red states last I checked, as are we. And the next one would be banning intentional PFAS use. This is a little bit depressing, but I've recently learned that there's this style of PFAS regulation called Amara's Law. And Amara Strand was a PFAS advocate in, I want to say Illinois, and she was a PFAS advocate because she got cancer, and she died from this cancer, and this was attributed to PFAS exposure. So now states are introducing bills called Amara's Law, which would ban the intentional use of PFAS across industries and across issue areas. Now the next thing, noise and light pollution control. I already talked about this with the example of Missoula County, right here, 3.5 hours away potentially. Very easy, require that there are standards so that noise and light do not disrupt the general quality of life. And then last, you're on the right slide. Even more words on this slide, God. So We already talked about ensuring data centers pay our way. We've talked about creating a separate rate class and large load tariffs. And I'll just say, last month, Washington introduced legislation that would have required data centers have a large load tariff, meet clean energy requirements, blah, blah, blah. Industry had been pledging to do this for months, ever since this topic was brought up. But I think you can all guess why this bill was killed and who was behind it. So this is an emblem of what's going on at so many different states and at so many different tech companies, where we see tech companies pledging to do the right thing, and then when it comes down to it, not doing that. Northwestern says that they support large load tariffs. They have yet to do that. I could go on. A few other ideas: fund low-income customer programs, make it so that energy bills are more affordable for all of us, not more expensive. Fund weatherization programs, and then finally, pay for the full cost of stranded assets. We are not going to have data centers in some amount of time because they will be replaced by the next thing. People who have been here for decades and who will be here for decades will have to deal with that mess and clean it up. We shouldn't have to pay for that, simply put. And finally, we should think about, when we approve data centers, where we allow them to be put. Are they in residential areas? Are they just in areas that are for industrial use? Are we really letting agricultural land be rezoned for data center development? I have thoughts on that. I will let you guess. And finally, and kind of the big picture of all of this is, we don't need to approve all of these projects. We can approve them when they meet the goals of the places that we live. And these are goals that we've all built together and we've all agreed upon. So they are there to hold us accountable, and for the legislators in the room to hold you all accountable especially.
I promise this part will be really fast. So here's a list of the people that you need to contact, that you need to say, what are you going to do about data centers and how are you going to protect us? So the first one, Public Service Commission, is obvious. We talked about that. Your Gallatin County Commissioners need to hear from you. We will be sending out this slide deck to everybody who signed in. We will be sending electronic versions of everything that we have on the back tables. And I'm happy to include the large load tariff request we sent and the Republican resolution. So if you give us your information, we will happily send an email after this that includes a lot of this information, so you don't need to take pictures of this. And then there's also the Broadwater County Commissioners, neighboring county commissions. I mean, this is a race to the bottom. They are trying to go to the places that have the least regulations, and they can get this done as quickly as possible, and before anybody really notices what's going on. So we really do need to be paying attention, not just to our backyard, but our neighboring backyard too. Next slide. And then, of course, there's the Montana legislature. Would legislators just raise their hands? These are the people. Thank you for your service. These are the people who are going to be making decisions next session about whether or not we're going to regulate data centers. And I do think this is bipartisan. I've talked to Republicans about this. I think that we can put together a package of bills that we can get across the finish line based upon people's concerns about water and electricity. Governor's Energy Task Force, it's really his data center task force. It is primarily data center or data center adjacent companies who are on the task force, and they are talking about how do we get more power for data centers. That is their focus. They do have one sidebar that is transmission. We need better transmission. Our transmission in the state is really old. It is not up to the task of the job we need it to do. We need to update our infrastructure, so I have faith praise for the governor for having a transmission component to his energy task force. But the rest of the energy task force is about how we can bring data centers into the state and get more power plants. And trust me, they're not talking about clean energy when they're talking power plants. So, Governor's Energy Task Force needs to hear from people because we seem to be an afterthought in their conversations. And the people of the state should be the forefront of their conversations. Next slide. Is that it? And then follow-up email. We will send you an email that has links to all sorts of stuff if you are interested. So make sure that we have your email address and that you can read it. Some people's handwriting might be like mine. and it can be very difficult to read, so we can't send it to you if we're not able to read the difference between your A's and your E's. Is that it? Is that the last slide? Oh, that was the last slide. I wanted to make sure we covered e-waste, because you know what? When these computer chips are no longer useful, they have a life of about 3 to 5 years, guess what happens? That is going to be e-waste. We want to make sure it's recycled. Missoula's local ordinance requires e-waste recycling. We should have that at the statewide level. We should make sure that they're not filling up our landfills with this e-waste and potentially critical minerals that we otherwise would have to mine. So there are solutions to every one of the problems we talked about today, but they will not be solutions if we don't act. So thank you for being here tonight. That is the first part of acting.